So it sounds like that kind of timeline you talk about, the kind of 5 years kind of campaigning to get an actor established, and in the hopes that you'll then, once they're more established, both start to benefit from that, means that you've got, probably better than anyone else, a great overview of what the career structure is, and I use that term very loosely, looks like for actors working professionally in Ireland. Can you talk a little bit about, like, what is a career structure? Is there a career structure for actors in Ireland?
Well, and the short answer is, of course, it's a career without a structure, in the sense that it's not like, as I have often said before, it's not like, let's say you worked in a supermarket for the sake of argument and you started out stacking shelves, and then maybe somebody gave you like a whole section to look after, and then maybe said, you know, you're really good at that. Could you actually run these 3 sections? And then maybe you could manage this part of the floor. And now you're going to manage the store. And presumably this is happening over a number of years. But, you know, ultimately you get my drift. You're going to become maybe the store manager, maybe the area manager, who knows? And that's a kind of a curve. And most careers have that kind of reasonably predictable curve. For us, it's not like that at all, because it's very hard for us or anybody else, in fact, it's impossible, to predict the size of and scale and frequency of the work that any actor is going to get, certainly at the beginning of their career. Even in the middle of their career, frankly, it can be very hard to figure out. But the reality is the jobs tend to go from, you know, no job to a tiny job to a huge job to no job again to a medium-sized job, a job that takes, you know, 16 weeks, a job that takes 4 days. You know, it's really hard to know what shape that's going to be. So your career curve is kind of like that. But the one thing that we do know, and I think certainly that I've observed, is that you do develop a sort of a level of work. So you develop sort of plateaus of work, where when you might start out doing profit share shows and shows that you're happy to put together with a group of creative mates, and that you do it literally for no money or for less than no money in some kind of a space that you've managed to get your hands on, there's a point past where you're probably prepared to do that anymore. And you might get to the point, hopefully you get to the point later on where you can actually produce something and say, well, actually I'm going to put my own money into this because I think it's worth doing, which is probably as close as you'd get back to that model. But those sorts of things, in other words, you might, as a young actor, you might book a couple of TV commercials because they will pay the rent and get you some camera experience. And, you know, as you get more established as an actor, you're very unlikely to want to do that. So, you know, those are the kind of levels that you kind of work through. You would hope, obviously, to go from working for, you know, from small independent theatre companies to working for more established theatre companies, for instance, into, say, the bigger houses as you grow into the business. The one thing that has changed in terms of theatre specifically in Ireland, for me, you know, since I started, was that we lost, after the last recession, we lost a big chunk of our independent theatre sector. We lost 11 companies in 1 year at one stage in a business that was not super big. And so I think we lost over 20 independents over about a 4-year period from 2008 to 2012. And that was particularly devastating for younger actors or for actors who were starting out in the business, because where you would hope to get that professional experience, develop your craft, as well as developing a career, for a lot of those actors was with those smaller companies who were perhaps more prepared to take a risk on a young actor, who had less at stake, who were working in alternative spaces, who were putting stuff together. And so I've said before, we have a slightly donut-shaped industry ever since. There's a big hole in the middle. We have the stuff at the real, you know, get-go of let's make a show because we were all in college together doing acting or doing theatre studies, and we're going to do a show when we get out of college. And getting from that to the main stage, or to the more established independent theatre companies, of which there are only a handful, this whole middle bit of your journey is gone now. And I do think that's a real problem. It's a problem for Irish actors specifically, and it's not, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. What is encouraging, I suppose, because I'm a child of the 80s, is that, like in the 80s when we had no money in Ireland and didn't even know what it looked like, the theatre business found ways to make theatre for no money, and companies like Rough Magic and Fish Amble absolutely came out of that tradition. Of making of poor theatre made for zero cash, and then small tiny bits of Arts Council funding because that's all that was available, and that came later on. And so, and Druid, indeed, you know, all of those companies had beginnings that were very humble financially, And I see that there are young companies all across town whose work I regularly see now who are doing good stuff with great casts, you know, and I'm more on the passing of Collapsing Horse, for instance, who I thought were fantastic and brought just a brilliant energy and a new way of looking at theatre. Ironically enough, narratively driven theatre that, you know, lots of other companies have moved away from, and Collapsing Horse went back and re-embraced the idea of narrative. And then companies that have made it through that stage, I think in the case of Collapsing Horse, incidentally, they just span off in different directions. I think, you know, it was actually they were a victim of their own success. But, you know, other companies like Anu, who have found a whole new way of presenting theatre to people, a whole different theatre experience, and who've gone again from very small, sort of financial beginnings where they were scraping it together from nothing to having a company that now is more established. So it can be done, and I see it all the time now happening. And I think certainly I know a lot of the theatre schools encourage their students to get out and make their own theatre, and I think that's 100% something that people have to embrace. Even if you don't need to be a producer or a writer, because not every actor is. But it would be great if one of your mates was, and that you got on well and you could maybe make something together. So I would always encourage young clients, if you've got a group of people around you that you've trained with, or that you went to college with, or whatever way context, maybe you went to a youth theatre with them or what have you. If you know them and you trust them, and you think they're an interesting group of people to do stuff with, then go do stuff with them, because it can only help you. And like I say, it's one of the ways that you build a career here in Ireland. I mean, the good news is on the other side, we make a lot more screen stuff here in Ireland than we ever did, particularly TV now. I guess when I started, we were making quite a lot of feature films. I think the first year I was in the agency, there was 14 feature films made in Ireland. And maybe 2 TV shows, and it's 100% the other way around now. Feature is a rarer beast, and it comes in 2 flavors now. Feature, it's either tiny independently produced, well, by international standards, tiny independently produced feature film, or big international kind of monsters that arrive in, take on some local casting and blow out of town again once they're done. But the TV is more indigenous. So if you look at shows like Vikings, or the Tudors before them, or well, lots of other stuff that's getting made at the moment. Indeed, obviously, Normal People, which everybody is obsessed with. Like we're having sort of a golden moment in television, and the glorious thing about something about Normal People was that they needed a young cast, and so they got this fantastic young cast, some of whom are getting a massive break for the first time out of the traps in a show directed by an Oscar-nominated Irish director. I mean, all of that stuff was kind of just for the birds in 2001 when I started. So, that, you know, that's really exciting. And I think, to sound an optimistic note, I genuinely believe that, you know, the crisis that we're all dealing with at the moment, there is a realistic chance that film and television can get back in production in Ireland by the end of the summer. I don't think that's unrealistic. I think people are pointing themselves at August and September, and I think that's doable. It'll take some doing, but it's doable. The live performance stuff is going to be tougher. It just is. I mean, it's just physically tougher to do that with social distancing. But I suppose, like I say, the positive side is that we have the talent, we have a proven track record, and in many cases there are TV shows kind of that are already greenlit and waiting to get made in this country that had to get postponed because of the crisis. So that business is as good as I've ever seen it, and was, you know, as good as I ever saw it until 6 weeks ago. But I think it has a good chance of bouncing back. And that presents opportunities for young actors as well, or for actors who are just starting out. Small parts, you know, a couple of days here, a couple of days there. But that's great. That's what you want in most cases, because it familiarizes you with a set. It gets you on and off a set in a part where you're unlikely to do yourself or anyone else any real damage, and makes the whole apparatus of being in a TV or film show a lot less intimidating the next time you come to do it. Because I think for a lot of Irish actors, most of them, I mean, if you look at, say, Paul Mescal, who has already developed a very interesting theatre CV right out of the traps, even as he was leaving his college. But this was his first job on screen, pretty much. I think he did one a day or 2 on something else, and then it was this. So that's a lot. That's a lot to take on, and fair play to him. He's absolutely nailed it. But I think, you know, you come out of a course like the course that you guys are doing in TUD, or a course in, say, the Lear or the Gaiety School, and obviously a lot of your training is for theatre, and that's appropriate because that's where pretty much everybody starts. And even, like I say, Paul had put in a good year of really solid theatre in leading roles. So it wasn't like from nothing that he got this role. And in fact, I think Lenny said he saw him in asking for it. I think that's what where he first came across Paul. So, yeah, so, you know, I found certainly for me, and I think it's true still, that we have a lot of theatre in our blood, we have a lot of theatre in our training, and we're less intimidated with the idea of theatre as actors and performers than we are when someone starts pointing cameras and sound equipment at you, and there's like 40 people over there, and there's like 25 extras over there, and you're standing on an X that you can't not stand on, and that's something that takes getting used to. So if the opportunity presents itself for a young actor to do a day and a small role, you know, that's a good opportunity, because the more you do that, the more you will figure out how all that works. And that's harder to, I think it's harder to teach as well, because how do you build the apparatus of a film set, you know, as a sort of a theoretical exercise? That's tough, right? So how do you reproduce that? So the only way to really get comfortable with it is by doing it, probably. So yes.
A smaller role means lower stakes, learning the chops.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I was saying earlier, I think with Simon Delaney actually a great analogy as an actor, saying, you know, when you go into an audition, you should think of yourself as being the guy who can fix somebody's dishwasher, you know, because they have a problem. They have to cast this role, right? And they're sitting behind a desk going, we're never going to find the guy to play this role. So your job is to show up and go, I'm the guy. I know how to do it, and convince them to take you on. And that element of, like I was saying before, if somebody being willing to take a risk on you. So if someone's willing to take a risk on you for you to deliver 2 lines, or you know, a line as you serve somebody a drink in a feature film or a TV show, means that you've got 1 credit, you've got through a role which is not going to put a massive amount of pressure on you, and it proves to the casting person and the director that you've done that, right? And then you do a couple of those, and then they go, well, he's done a couple of those, maybe he could have a crack at this, or she could have a crack at that. And, you know, it's about the person hiring you's confidence as much as it is about your own. The other great anecdote was Chris O'Dowd, when he talked about Moon Boy. I was at a Q&A for this years ago, and Chris told a great story about how himself and Vincent, his friend, had written Moon Boy, and they got the green light from Sky to make it, and so they start casting it, and they have to meet a whole 1,000,000 bunch of kids to play the 2 main roles, because without the kids you've got nothing. The show is those 2 boys, and otherwise you've not got a show. So, and he knows who he wants for a lot of the other roles anyway. He wants, you know, he wants Deirdre, and he wants Peter, and he wants, you know, these people that he knows and respects. So he's going to find these 2 brand new kids. And he said he went through about 3 weeks of auditions with kids from drama schools and from youth clubs and from wherever they could find them. And after 3 weeks, he said, my script is terrible. I've written a terrible script, which is unperformable, and my show is a disaster. And then I think he met Martin Rolls on the Thursday, and the other kid whose name I can't remember on the Friday, and he had his cast, and he also realized his script wasn't terrible. Just, it needed the right 2 kids to be able to deliver it. So, and the point of that, I suppose, is that, you know, the guy that wrote it and the people that are producing it and the people that are directing it are every bit as insecure as the people who are auditioning for it. Everybody's worried it might be a disaster. And if you can give them a glimmer of hope that it won't be, and that it's going to be okay, that's when people take a risk on you, because you seem like less of a risk, because it's all a risk, right?
That's a lovely way of thinking about it, that it's not that they're the scary kind of gatekeepers, that they're looking to make something and you're there to help. Absolutely.
And look, some people, you know, I'm wearing a shirt and jacket today for the first time in 6 weeks, because that's what an agent looks like, right? So, you know, if I show up for a meeting, this is how I show up. I'd probably be wearing pants. I'm wearing pants. But so, right, we all play a role. And sometimes directors or producers can be quite standoffish and a little bit intimidating, and I always now look at that as going, well, okay, that's the way you're dealing with the stress of being a director or producer. You've developed this kind of shell around yourself, which is in some way difficult to penetrate, and that protects you. So you can be the grumpy director, or you can be the taciturn producer. But I 100% know for a fact that all of those people are scared in their boots that the thing that they're about to direct or produce is going to be terrible. Right, and if they're not, then they're psychotic, because that's what everybody in this business goes to bed with, wakes up with in the morning with. Maybe I'm terrible. Maybe the thing I'm in is terrible. Maybe it's all going to be a disaster. And the joy of it is when it isn't, when it works and you go, oh, I was right. This was actually, when I started this thing, it was a good idea, and it's still working. So, people arm themselves against the insecurity of our business. But yeah, trust me when I tell you, everybody is insecure. Nobody thinks, I think anybody ever finishes a day of casting, for instance, and goes, I have 100% got the right people for this job. High 80s at best, I think, in most cases, and in that you'd be happy. Because it's tough. It's a strange business. There are no certainties. Even when normal people was coming together, it's not like there was no risk. Even though you've got an Oscar-nominated director, you have a Booker-nominated writer, you have this incredible cast of young actors, an amazing DOP, the whole thing. It's got the BBC behind it, for heaven's sake. It has a budget. Is there a guarantee that it was going to work? Absolutely not. It could have been terrible. As it turns out, it's glorious. It's not terrible at all. And that's one of the things that we love about the business. That risk is actually part of what makes it interesting, Or, a glass of water.
Otherwise, we're all crazy.
What?
Otherwise, we're all a little bit crazy.
Yeah, well, there's that too. I mean, it's a job, as I have frequently said before, where people dress up as people that they're not, and to pretend to be those people to a room full of people who know they're not that person for money. That's the essential basis of the business. So it is inherently irrational. It's one of the most gloriously irrational things that human beings do. I mean, all forms of art, I guess, but this is the art form that I'm familiar with. And I've always thought if aliens came down tomorrow and tried to figure out what we're at, this would be the really tricky bit to explain, because it's entirely irrational. Well, we sit in a room and he pretends to be this guy, and we know he isn't that guy or she's not that girl, but that we let them pretend that because it's entertaining and informs us, and we feel good, or terrible or whatever. We have a feeling as a result of it, and we're quite happy to pay for that. And my job is somehow to help facilitate that business. Yeah, it's not the most rational thing, and as a consequence, I suppose it's fair to say it doesn't always attract the most rational people. We're all a little bit, everybody I've ever worked with in this business is eccentric, I guess is the word you could use, because it's quite an odd thing to do professionally. But for all that, a gloriously odd thing to do. Obviously, when it works, there's nothing like it. And even though I'm, a game termed poacher, I guess, I still get that buzz. I had the privilege of sitting in a private screening of Herself, Claire Dunn's movie, which hasn't come out yet, which made a big noise in Sundance just recently. Produced by Element and directed by Phyllida Lloyd, an amazing Irish cast, an incredible story. And Claire's been a client of ours for donkey's years, and she came up with the script 4 years ago. Myself and Lisa had read it and had both gone, God, that's amazing. That's an incredible script. And nearly 5 years, 4.5 years later, she got it made. And to be sort of a part of that in a way, to have maybe helped a little bit in that process is quite thrilling, because it doesn't always work. Sometimes, it has a very good chance of not working. and we're sort of there. Part of your job as an agent is to be able to legislate for that as well. Like, what if it doesn't work out? How does this all work financially? For instance, if nobody goes to see this film, how's my client looked after in terms of the deal that he or she had going in? Okay. So yeah, a lot of what I do is the downside, as my wife occasionally reminds me that professionally I'm a downside. It's my job to sort of see the things that can go wrong and try and legislate against them, because it's a risky business. But the upside is those moments when you see it work.
That's fabulous. Let's talk a little bit about the practicalities of how actors can kind of arm themselves best for this.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how actors should approach things like CVs or headshots or show reels?
Okay. So, yeah, I think a couple of basics. For your CV, so here's the good news, right? Unlike a lot of other businesses, our business is not obsessed with how experienced you are. I mean, it helps, right? It helps. We talked about earlier the idea that somebody have a bit more confidence in you if you've done a couple of things than if you've done nothing. But we're also, conversely, very excited about new talent. We're always excited to meet and check out new talent. And that's whether you're an agent or a casting director or a director. So being new is not a bad thing. And so you don't need to disguise how new you are in your CV. Might be other jobs where you might need to fluff it out a little bit to make it look like, you know, you've been a chartered accountant for a long time and now is the time for you to move to this chartered accountancy. Our business isn't like that. So anything over a page for a young actor is a waste of paper. Get it down to a page. The highlights is all we need. And if there, you know, and if there are only a couple of highlights, that's fine. It's really fine, because whoever you are in that situation, we're going to be taking a bit of a chance on you. Obviously, if you've worked with somebody who you think their name will resonate, make sure that you've listed them on your CV prominently, that you've worked with this director or that producer, or alongside maybe this actor. You know, make that easy to see on the page. But don't worry too much about what you got in your junior cert, or, you know, I don't really need to know what your hobbies are. It'd be good to know what your skills are, but it's not going to necessarily be a deal breaker if you can't ride a horse. You know, you can learn to ride a horse. So it's more about a very basic, simple, this is where I trained. If I trained somewhere, maybe some of the people I trained with and some of the shows we did is also fine. Any professional work at all that you might have done and who you've worked with, or if you've done some fringe stuff or some profit share stuff, that's all good, but keep it brief, because it's not, in a young actor or an actor who's out to just establish themselves, I'm not expecting, you know, 3 pages of stuff. So that's the CV. This is the photograph bit, so you can help me on this. So
I'm ready.
Okay, so here's the thing. Photographs are tricky because although, you know, it seems a little bit, I'm sure it actually seems, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not a very deep or way to make a kind of a call on an actor or not. Superficial is the word I was looking for. But the reality is we work in a visual medium a lot of the time, and we do need to have a strong sense of what your look is, what you look like. And part of that for an agent is knowing, well, I actually have, you know, another girl who looks kind of like you, and that would be confusing from a casting point of view, or maybe a guy who's too similar to you, whatever. So what I always would say is take the time and spend the money on a decent headshot, right? There are a number of good headshot photographers around town. Browse them, check out their prices, look at the websites, look at, you know, the website for Lisa Richards, look at the website for the agency, for Lorraine Brennan, for career, you know, for First Call Management, for all of those companies. And a lot of them will list the photographer somewhere on the headshot. And go, you know, window shopping and ring around the photographers and find out what they cost. It's
what would be an average price?
It would start from about 200, 250 quid for a session, where you'll spend maybe an hour or so with a photographer. You'll come away with a contact sheet. They'll probably offer you, you know, 4 or 5 enlarged and finished images from that sheet. For a lot of photographers, somewhere around the 250 range, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like anything else, it's how much do you want to spend? So you can spend up to 600 or 700 quid in your photographs. I don't really recommend that for people who are just coming out of college, because I think what you'll get there is often a very specific style of photograph, and that can be useful for some things, right? So if you look, for instance, on my website, on Lisa Richards' website, you'll see, say, Sarah Green and Amy Huberman and a few people like that, who have quite a glamorous looking photograph. They're beautiful women, obviously, but they take a very good photograph. But these are quite deliberately glamorous photographs. And part of that was to do with they were working a little bit in the United States, and they have a different sort of style for what they expect in a headshot. So we had gone to photographers who were quite high end and who produced these slightly cosmetically glamorous images for people who had a very specific need for them in terms of their American work. We don't really need that here. Mm-hmm. What we need here is a really good photograph of you, you know, on a good day. And what I'll do is, by way of showing you a terrible photograph of me, I've already armed Tanya with a headshot. It's, relax everybody, it's me. Because for years I want to be able to talk about a bad headshot, and I can't use one of my clients' bad headshots or some person who applied to the agency's bad headshots. Of course, that would be wrong. And I was cleaning out my attic about 3 or 4 years ago, and I found my old headshot and realized just how terrible it is. So Tanya, can you share a screen, and I'll try and talk through why this is. There it is. Okay, so obviously it's the late 90s. That's clear from the enormous pirate earring that I've got on my left ear. And again, like, that's such a simple thing. For most people, take the jewelry out of your face, by and large, right? Because that's a specific look. There's nothing wrong with it, but it suggests something, right? So people make decisions about characters, particularly on film and television, the moment they see them. Right, the moment you appear on screen, people start to go, "Oh, he looks a bit shifty," or she looks like maybe she's up to something, or whatever. And a lot of that's to do with the way you look. So you're trying to present a look of yourself which is more open than the look that I've presented here, which strongly suggests that I might steal your television. So, and oddly enough, I got quite a lot of work in that sort of area. So lose the facial jewelry, it's too specific. I have also gone for black and white here, which, there was forgivable maybe in the late 90s, but it really isn't now. We don't shoot movies in black and white, with very notable exceptions, or TV. So we don't really need to see you in black and white. The only reason we used to use black and white was it hides spots and blemishes more easily than color. At least it did. Now, of course, you can touch those out in color very easily. So there's no need to go for black and white. So you'll see, if you look at the headshots that are out there on our site or sites like ours, you'll find 100% color pretty much at this stage. It might be like a really arty one that we got from someone you think is really cool that's in black and white, but that would be the only reason it's there. So yeah, a couple of other problems here. I'm in half light. Generally, people like to see your whole face. Though in my case, maybe an exception, but generally they like to see a whole face. So that the photographer might have thought, oh, that looks kind of interesting, but the reality is for casting, it's not great. It also makes one of my eyes look much more open than the other, and the casting director is not going to know that my eyes always don't look like that. And finally, I have, for some reason, lent on something when this photograph has been made. I'm kind of leaning on a chair in some way, and then the photographer has cropped it so that I look like I have some kind of a misalignment issue with my shoulders, which just isn't helping, right? So there's nothing, and the haircut, can't even talk about the haircut. The haircut, I don't know what I was thinking. It wasn't even, I think I got that professionally cut, which is actually, the worst thing about it. So, and the other thing to say about it, I suppose, joking aside, is that I chose this headshot with my then girlfriend and my slightly horrified agent at the time. And I think we went in, we think it's this, we think it's great. And she kind of went, yeah, okay, because you think it's great. I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. But really what you should be doing when you've got your headshots done is to try and take as much advice as you can from as many people who have been in the business for a little while as you can. Show it to a couple of people if they'll give you the time, if you can wave it at a director or an actor who's been in the business for a couple of years, or it's just somebody who's got and somebody's got a bit of objectivity in it. So ideally not somebody who's going out with you at the time, or your mum, because they're going to say nice things about it because they love you. So you have to find somebody who likes you but is prepared to say, yeah, it's not your best look. So that's and actually that's sort of where to take your advice from, more broadly while we're on this subject. I would say if you're going to, obviously listen to your agent. I'd say that, right, because I'm your agent. But I would also say if you're going to talk to other people in the business, try and talk to people in the business a lot longer than you. Like a lot of your peer group are going through exactly the same stuff you are, and they know as much as you do, and often that's not very much, and that's okay because they're just starting out. But everybody has an opinion, right? So you'll get a lot of advice as you go through this career, often from people who have no idea what they're talking about, or who have based their advice entirely on their experience, and they're not you. So their experience is only really useful to them. For instance, they might have a terrible relationship with their agent and say, well, you don't want to work with my guy because he's a nightmare. Because they have a terrible relationship with their agent doesn't mean that you're going to have a bad relationship with their agent. And that happens all the time as well. So I always say, I can't remember who's responsible for the phrase that free advice is worth exactly what you paid for it. But it is worth thinking about, that if you're paying somebody, as you are in my case, for their advice, you should probably listen up. And if it's just somebody who you like in the pub and they've got a view, well, you can have a conversation, but I don't think I would put as much weight on that. So I should have taken better advice on the headshot, in exactly that way. If I'd gone to a couple of older actors, I'm sure they would have gone, here, you need to have another crack at that. But I didn't. So that's the photograph bit. Please feel free to take that down, Tanya, because it's haunting me now.
Will do. Thank you for sharing.
That's okay. It's kind of a cleansing process for me from my acting career. I did actually get jobs. That's the frightening thing. But anyway, so then after that, I think if we're talking about the CV and the photograph, obviously the next thing is the show reel. And that's more and more a thing. Obviously, depending if you're ancient like I am, we had to do things with VHS tapes that were incredibly complicated and tedious. Now it's obviously a lot easier. But I would caution against just using material because you have it. I think, again, take some advice on the material that you think you want to put into your reel. Professionally shot stuff is always preferable to stuff that you've shot at home or that a friend of yours has shot for you, unless they're highly talented. Just because, when it comes to your photograph and your CV and your show reels, specifically when you're coming out into the business for the first time, if you like, you want to bring your A game, you want to bring your best game, because those first impressions will stick. And so do spend the time and the money on the photograph. Do spend some time in your show reel. Again, take advice. If you haven't got a reel because you haven't shot anything yet worth putting on a reel, that's fine too. I don't expect everybody that comes at me to have a reel. I will need to see their work somehow, so I'm going to expect to go see them in a show or see their showcase or what have you. But if you haven't got a reel, Paul Mescal didn't have a reel. He's doing okay. So you don't have to have a reel. And we talked about making your own work, obviously. The other thing I'd say, and I suppose it's a connected question in a way, just to the mechanics of that. People ask, how or when do I approach an agent? And so once you're happy that you've got a simple, direct CV, you've got a headshot that you like, and more importantly, other people like, and then you either do or don't have a show reel that you can send with all that stuff. Email is probably best at this stage. We do get stuff through the post, but if I'm honest, the email is just as effective now, and that's the majority of what I get. And the timing of that's important. So I would say if you've got something really cool that you've just managed to get your hands on for your show reel, that's a good time to send me stuff. If you're about to appear in a show in a role that you think is going to show you off really well, that's a good time to get in touch. Now that's a tougher one to call, right? If you had like 3 really nice scenes of normal people and you can cut them together and send them to me, well, that's useful, right? Because I'll know the show and you're good in those 3 scenes, and that's interesting. Theater is harder to call because a lot of the time you're going to be rehearsing a show. And if you're like I was as an actor, you're going to go through the entire rehearsal process going, this is a disaster. Who wants to see this? This isn't even a show. And then you'll get to opening night and think, why am I doing this to myself? I should do something else. And then the show will open, and then you'll think, oh, actually, maybe this is okay. And the problem then is, well, the show is only running for 10 nights. How do I get anybody in to see it, right? Because I generally, and I think most agents and casting directors and directors need a bit more of a lead in than I'm in the show, it ends next week. Can you come and see it? That's tough for us to pull off because we see a lot of shows of our clients. Obviously, I'm out, before all this happened, I was out probably on average 3 nights a week, either at mostly at theater, sometimes at a screening for my clients. So I've got to find an extra night in the week to see your show. And that's true of lots of other people in the business, casting directors and directors who are out that often. So they've got to find that extra night in the week to see your show, and they probably need as much notice as you can give them. Not 6 months notice because they'll forget, it's too far out, but a couple of weeks will be great. So you're maybe going to have to take a risk. You're maybe going to be in the second week of rehearsals of a thing and think, okay, this is a good company. I think the script is good. I know these actors around me are pretty hot. I should probably tell some agents about it, even though in week 2, I think this thing isn't working at all and I'm terrible in it. You might have to take a risk and say, please come and see me in this show. And also make sure, but don't feel like you have to invite people to every show you're in. You might be in a really small part, which would be really hard for me to make any kind of a call on what you're like as an actor. Or I had an actor ask me to a show once when she was in mask for the whole thing. I'm sure she was great, but it's really hard to make any kind of a call if I can't see your face, even though the part required that you wear a mask. That's fine, but it's hard to make a call. And I would need to see her again. So the timing can be important. I always say, people say, well, maybe I write to the agent once and maybe I'll write them to them maybe a second time when I'm in something else or whatever. And I think my rule of thumb is, it's okay to ask somebody to the prom maybe twice, maybe 3 times. And after that, it starts to get creepy. So you got to, realize that if you ask me every 6 months to see your work, I'm just going to go off the idea because I'm feeling like under pressure, like I'm being stalked or something. So you have to, kind of time that, be confident that you think this is a good thing for you to be seen in if it's live work, or know that you've got some really good stuff in a reel. Don't email me and tell me that your reel isn't finished yet, but it's going to be great when I can get it either. That's not a good idea. Email me when it's done. It's okay. I'll still be here. I hope. I hope we all will be. But, that we're not, the business is there. It's not going away, I don't think. So, be patient. If it means you got to wait a little while to have your stuff the way it needs to be, then have it be that way. When you make that approach to an agent or to a casting director, perhaps, or to a producer or a director. Yeah, okay. I think is that more or less what you were looking to cover, Tanya, in terms of the basics, or have I missed something?
Yeah, I actually might just ask one question, kind of bouncing off that last part, where you were talking about like how to approach an agent in a smart and professional manner. And I think that's a good question, is how, particularly for young actors, I'll preface this by saying Aaron Monaghan, who works a lot with Druid and who's the artistic director for Live and Dread, once said one of the smartest things I think I've ever heard an actor say. And he said, when young actors ask me, what should I do? How should I make myself stand out when I'm working after graduation? He said, for the first year after graduation, you shouldn't be saying anything. If you get to be in a room with professional actors who don't have interesting stories, they do. Listen to them. Just listen. Don't try and make yourself sparkly and shiny. Listen to them. So how can actors, particularly those who don't have a lot of experience of being in professional situations, comport themselves professionally? Okay,
it's a good question. I think Aaron is largely right. I mean, there's definitely a process of listening that you've got to do as a young actor. And I'm a natural talker. It was probably, I ended up being an agent. I probably didn't listen enough when I was a young actor, but it is something that's important. It's also important to ask questions, though, and it's okay to ask questions. You got to find your time, right? So you're going to wait your turn. And if you're asking a question on a film set and somebody has literally just, shouted speed, that's not the time to ask the question. So there are other, so you've got to, probably keep your head down a little bit at the beginning in those kind of high pressure situations and ask questions when you feel you can, or maybe, it's not, you don't ask that question to the director. If it's a practical question, find an assistant director or another cast member who's maybe got a couple of years and you go, what do I do I don't understand how does that even work in the reverse? What is that? So, feel free to, I think it's important to ask some questions, but I think Aaron is right that you don't want to be, taking up a lot of time, particularly on a film or TV set, because time is money, more so in film and TV than is in theater, that obviously it is in theater as well. So, I also think Sarah Green had one of my favorite bits of advice for any young actor. And actually, there's more to this than meets the eye as a piece of advice. And it was a young actor asked her, how do you behave on a set? When you go on the first time, maybe it's a rehearsal room full of senior actors for a play, or maybe it's a TV show and you're like a small part. And how do you comport yourself? And Sarah said, as Sarah could only say, don't be a dick. And what she meant was, don't let it get the better of you, right? And I think that's what Aaron's talking about to some degree as well. The situation is, when you're starting out like that, is always intimidating, and you have to rein in the nerves, which might make you say and do things that are annoying to other people, because that's, I think, often when somebody is like that on a set, that's really, again, insecurity, just finding its way out of your body in different ways. And so it's good advice, because people unfortunately remember, if you're poorly behaved on a set, and this is a small business, and here's the news, everywhere in the world this is a small business, so that gets around, and people go, oh, I heard he was kind of hard work, and who needs that? It's a tough enough job as it is. So you don't want to paint yourself into that corner, and I absolutely 100% understand when an actor can do it to his or herself. It's usually to do with a sense of I feel exposed and insecure, and I don't know what's happening to me, and I have to stop now and ask you a question. And I think there are times when it's absolutely fine to do that, but there are times when you have to go, deep breaths, I think I can get through this, and let me have a crack at it, and if I get it wrong, somebody's going to tell me, and if I think I've done it wrong, I can at least maybe grab a moment where I can say that. So yeah, you have to the other thing I would always say to any young actor, what I think, because you're so caught up in your 4 lines that you've got to do without tripping over the table or the wire that's under it to the lighting guy or whatever, right? That you're so caught up in that what you're not seeing a lot of the time is the work that's happening around you. And there's a lot of incredible technical work happening around you, but there's also usually a more experienced actor than you in the scene. And he or she is the person that you should also be watching. Like, how do they handle it? How are they getting through their day? And crucially, just watch them work. If you can hang around in the set, if the director doesn't mind you being able to hang around in the set for a little longer than you would normally be there, then do that. And if you're in a play, 100% watch those performances from the wings or on the monitor when you can, if you're not on. Because I know I did that as a theatre actor, and it taught me a lot over the years. I got into the habit, if there was a senior actor on stage, I might have done my bit in Act 1 and I had a bit to do in Act 4, and I could either spend the next, hour and a half smoking fags and doing the crossword, or I could stand in the wings and watch them work. Now, sometimes I smoked fags and did the crossword, that's definitely true, but other times I stood in the wings and watched them work. And I had the privilege to be in a play in the Abbey called Terry Flynn that Pauline Flanagan was in. And Pauline was an extraordinary theatre actress, like one of those kind of giants. She had worked with everybody in Broadway. She worked with Zero Mostel. She was amazing. And I watched her from the wings, I think, every night of that show. And gosh, we did a number of productions of it because she did that extraordinary thing that an experienced actor can do. She did the same thing but different every night. So it was the same, but it wasn't the same. And it wasn't the same because she was reacting to the room and because she was reacting to the actors around her. It was the same because she never deviated from the direction of the script. She was doing what was asked of her, the same but different. And again, for theatre, the stuff that makes the hair stand up the back of your neck, particularly as a performer, is that. To see somebody, oh, I didn't see you do that before. But it's not like you've done something radically different that's wrong. You've just done a subtle thing that's different. And so there's a lot to be learned, from the actors around you and from the more established people around you when you go into this work situation. So looking and listening is really useful. I think he's right. And if you get a chance to get down to the set before they're doing the setup for your shot, if somebody doesn't mind you being on the set a little early and watching the director work with the actor before it's your turn, that's going to be useful as well, because it's less of a surprise to see what the set's like. Is it very formal? Is it chatty? Is it, are they jokey? Are they very serious? Or, what are they like? Because I've been on a lot more film and TV sets as an agent than I ever was as an actor. And what I've learned, which is fascinating to me, is that most film sets and TV sets, there's a certain amount of formality, there's a chain of command. And there has to be, because there's maybe 100 people in the crew, maybe more, depending, it's Game of Thrones, God knows how many people are in the crew, but there's a lot of people in the crew, right? And at the end of the day, everybody from each department is going to look at the director and go, are you happy with that? And so everything funnels back to him or her. Mm. The director sits at the top of that pyramid, and he or she deals with heads of department right across the board, from cinematography to costume to set design to the actors to everybody else. And so it's like a busy kitchen. It's like watching a really big kitchen operate with a really good head chef. Mm. And that has, the reason that the commie chef shouts, "Yes, chef," is not to make the chef feel important. It's to let the chef know that he's been heard and that the thing is getting done. And if there's that many people in a room, that's what you have to do. So that formality has a use. It's not about people, posing. They're not, you don't have to call me chef or whatever, it's not about that. It's about getting it done, and getting it done under pressure, which is always the case in film or TV. And to a certain extent under theatre as well. Theatre has a more languorous rehearsal process, but you're trying to put together an entire piece that you're going to do all at one go. Mm. So you need more time to do that, put that together. It's a different kind of pressure. But so that formality is important and to be observed and so useful, and with it comes a discipline. And it doesn't mean that you can't speak to the director, and it doesn't mean you can't have a conversation, because of course you can. But you need to gauge it a little bit, and you need to be aware that different people work in different ways. So, there may be a film or a theatre director who's quite happy to take 10 minutes out to talk to you about the motivation of your character who has 4 lines, or they might not. And so you need to try and be aware of that. And that's hard, because the fear is buzzing in your ears. You know what I mean? It's like you're whether you're on stage or in a screen project, you have all that to deal with, and then you have to be able to kind of look around you and see what's going on around you as well. But yeah, it's important, and I think it's good advice. It's good advice, just generally.
Yeah. I think "don't be a dick" is kind of the command we can.
That's a life. I put on a t-shirt right now, right? I mean, I think it's.
And on that note, this is probably a good point to open it up for our students to ask questions. So as I mentioned at the start, what I'll do is I'll just ask any students to either use the hand up option on Zoom, or you can just type "hands up" in the chat and I'll call on you. I know all of our students by name at this point, so I'll call on them. If there's anyone who is not a current student of TU Dublin, we are going to let the students ask questions first, but if there's time at the end, we will allow time for kind of an open session. All right, and I see the first hand up. Okay, Cian Hoyne, I'm going to unmute you and ask you to put your video on if you could.
Hi.
Again.
Pleasure to meet you. So what are some of the kind of key qualities that you would look for in a prospective new talent? Is it largely technical performance, or is there part persona and personality and tenacity in that talent? And what sparks your sense to gamble, your gut sense to gamble on that person?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it's a really easy answer to say it's a combination of those things, but it's a combination of those things. And I can't quite quantify, if I'm completely honest, I can't quite quantify exactly what it is that draws me to one actor over another, maybe as an agent. Now, there are technical things. So I may have already a number of clients in your age range who share a look with you, right? And I might just go, well, I have, 3 guys who already look like you, as I was talking about earlier. And that then is not anything to do with whether I think you're talented or not. That's just like, this doesn't make sense. I can't be sending, 4 of my clients up against each other for the same job. That's a disaster. So there's that. But in terms of the qualities of the actor, I guess it is a combination of, what we do in my agency is that we'll see your work. We'll hopefully see it more than once if we can, but we'll see your work. And then if we're interested in you as a performer, we'd look to meet you. And that is about seeing about a kind of a, what's the word? I don't want to say chemistry, but there's a certain, interaction that you'd hope for with a client, which isn't about you being incredibly charming or about you being hilarious in the interview or any of that. It's just about, I suppose, what we just talked about, the ability to listen in a conversation and the ability for us to have a conversation and for us to see what your goals are like and whether we think you're being realistic about what you're expected to get out of us and if we're being realistic about what we think we could deliver for you. So, I think that's a big part of it, that it's not like lots of other relationships, right? You have an accountant or a lawyer or what have you, and usually that's not a particularly personal relationship. There is a personal aspect to a relationship you have with an agent. It's a little bit weird in that way, partially because I had an English agent who said to me once that she said, "Oh, darling, we're a combination of the Samaritans in a bank," and there is a little bit of that. We do a bit of. We hear you at your best. We hear you at your worst. We're there for you when it's working and when it's not working. And so you get to know your agent and your agent gets to know you in a way that you probably don't even necessarily present yourself to other people in the business. So it is a personal thing, and that's intangible, impossible to define, but that's the thing of us kind of going, yeah, I think he seems like a nice guy. We could work with him. Or going, I didn't know what he was trying to say, or I was confused, or, so that kind of chemistry, which, and the only advice there is, which is a tough thing to say to any actor, is just to be yourself. And most people didn't get into this business to do that. They got in this business to pretend to be other people. But there is that moment where you need to be yourself in the room. Obviously, you need to put some energy into it. You need to project yourself a little bit. You don't need to do a big sales job. We're salesmen and women anyway, so we don't need to be sold. But you need to project yourself a little bit, just the energy of yourself. I hope that helps. But I think technically, hand on my heart, we take on a lot of young actors who are, if they were fully ready to go and were technically 100% at everything, there wouldn't be much for us to help develop, right? So what we're trying to guess a lot of the time, there's an agency in Australia which the motto is excellence through guesswork, but what we're trying to guess, the gut bit is whether we think that the actor that we're seeing in front of us now could grow into something really interesting over the next 5 years or 6, 10 years or whatever. So that's again an intangible. But what would definitely be, I suppose, true is that if you are producing your voice well, if you've got good movement skills, if in other words you're technically looking very competent up there, that is a massive leg up, right? Because we know that you don't need to learn that stuff, that you've got that down. Yeah. And for theatre in particular, film is a little bit harder to quantify, but for theatre in particular, it is a technical exercise. I was thinking about it last night. I just actually read an article written by Neil MacLeamore, about however many years ago. And he was fascinating, talking about the difference between being a theatre actor, which he very much was, and a film actor. But he makes that the delineation between art and craft, and I think that's really important. That the art is the art, right? The art of being an actor, of delivering a character in a convincing way, and of telling the truth as that character as much as you can. That's the same for film and TV and theatre. But for theatre, the craft of what you do is different. Like, it's a different craft. That ability to throw an emotion across a room the size of half a tennis court and have it hit the back wall, that's different, right? That's a craft. Film is different, because film is about the moment and the camera finding you, and you know, having that emotion, but not necessarily trying to show it, but letting us know you're having it, which is a tricky bit. But, you know, so that, yeah, I think if I can see an actor on a stage and he or she has a well-produced voice, it has a clear idea of themselves physically, and maybe gives me a sense of just feeling like they're loving doing what they're doing, then that's a good start, you know.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, you're muted. Hold on. Did I do that?
I muted myself. Sorry. Thank you so much.
I've unmuted you.
The next person with their hand up in the air is Caroline Kane. Caroline, I'm going to ask you to stick your video on.
Hello.
Hi, Caroline.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks so much for this webinar. It was really, really interesting to hear what you have to say. My question was just in regards to like emails with resumes and whatnot. So obviously, like an agency company would get like loads of them. And I was just wondering, is there any kind of do's or don'ts with emails, with resumes? Or I know you answered like only do them every 6 months or whatever, that kind of thing for consistency. But like, is there anything that straight away you'd be like in the trash with an email or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so glaring, really big long emails, probably a bad idea. So if it's like 3 pages long about your hopes and dreams as an actor, I'm not, with the best will in the world, going to have time to read all that. The thing that'll get you, you know, I think it's still true to say the thing that will probably turn an agent or a casting director off quickest of all is a bad headshot. That's if you come away from this with anything, you know, as I wittered on about the headshot thing earlier on, it really is important. I get it, it's superficial. People spend a long time training to be an actor, and then I'm like, yeah, but what do you look like in your headshot? But the reality is, there is that moment when a headshot pops up on your screen, or we used to get the photograph in the door, and you kind of go, oh, well, she looks interesting. And then, you know, then I read the letter, right? So that's the first. And then the second thing, I suppose, is try and avoid what is very obviously a generic letter, right?
Okay.
So it helps to display some knowledge of the agency, not necessarily the agent, but certainly of the agency that you're writing to, or the casting director that you're writing to, or the director that you're writing to. Because everybody's got an ego, right? So everybody likes to know that you're just, you know, you're actually in some way interested in them. You've done a bit of work on it. And so that helps. So try not to have it look too generic. But it doesn't need to be, you know, like I say, good headshot, show reel if you've got one, simple CV, and keep the email as short and snappy as you like. And not like 2 lines. I do get those. Kind of like, you know, I'm ready to work. Get in touch.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're gonna have to try a little bit harder than that. But you know, by the same token, you don't have to write the modern novel to get my attention either. You know, like a couple of paragraphs will do it.
Okay, cool.
Hope that helps.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thanks, Caroline. All right, the next person with their hand in the air was Matthew Nolan. Matthew, I'm gonna unmute you and ask you to stick your camera on.
Hello, how are you?
Hi,
Again, thank you very much for being here on the webinar. It's been very interesting. I just have a really quick question. It's kind of similar to the do's and don'ts. I know you touched on how a CV should look and stuff, but I was just wondering, was there a specific kind of structure or a format in which you should lay it out? And like, for example, should your headshot be attached to your CV in the corner or something, or should you have something like your training first, and then is there a specific format on how you would lay it out?
I think there isn't a specific one, but those are both of the things you just said are very good ideas. So yes, the little thumbnail of your photograph in the CV is useful, because I might look at it separate from the photograph. And back in the day, they might get separated because I had two physical things, and one might get lost in an office somewhere. But even still, it's useful just to have that little thumbnail on your CV. Your training up the top, I think, is a good idea. And then I tend to go chronologically as much as possible. So the stuff you've done most recently at the top of that CV, and work your way down.
Okay.
I would say it's up to you then in terms of where you think your strongest game is CV-wise, right? So if you think, well, I've done some really interesting theater things, definitely those go first. If you think, well, I worked with this really cool filmmaker he's definitely heard of, that goes first, right? So, give it a hierarchy on the basis of where you think your strongest game is, yeah?
Okay.
And then things like skills are useful, but they don't necessarily need to be at the top of that. Get them on the page somewhere. If you ride a horse, if you have a full driving license, if you're a talented archer, whatever that might be. Or obviously things like singing, if you've got a trained singing voice, and if you know whether you're a soprano or a mezzo, whatever, and you know what your belt is or any of that stuff, get that on there. That's all good for us to know. If you speak Irish, it's really useful for us to know that as well. And again, make that reasonably prominent somewhere in your CV. If you've got really good Irish, if you've got a decent Leaving Cert Irish, that's less useful. But if you went to a Gael school or you are just a Gael Gore, then hooray, because there was a whole other area of work for you there.
Okay.
So yeah, those kinds of things, I think. But yeah, definitely training, things you think are most important, that you've done, whether they're college productions or professional productions, it doesn't matter. Okay. Make sure that the person that directed the show is on there, whether that's college or professional. That's really useful for us because we'll know the directors, or we know most of the directors in town. We represent quite a few of them. So, that's useful for us. I hope that helps. Is that
yeah, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Matthew. All right. The next person with their hand up was Con Cowman. Con, if you want to unmute yourself and stick your camera on.
Hi, Johnathan. Thanks very much. It's been really, really, really informative. Sorry, interrupted there for a second. My question is, so say fate's align, and just an example, I get represented by someone, but the work isn't coming through because, as you say, it's a 5-year process of building and building and building.
Yeah.
If then say mates of mine are coming to me, hey, Con, do you want to be in this? Would you recommend then in that position to go to your agent and say, my friend wants me to do this, is this a wise idea? Or would you say, no, just go ahead and do it?
Oh, I think you should definitely, that's a good question, Con. You should definitely go to your agent and say, look, I've got these mates who are doing a show. I want to be in it. They want me to be in it. I think it's a good idea. And there's lots of reasons to do that. One of which is so that we know that you're doing it, so that we know your dates. Because it might be that I might say to you, well, I'm actually pitching you for this other thing that clashes with that show. So could you just get your mate to hang on for a couple of days and we'll see whether or not that's going to work or not? Or if that's not the case, at least I know that you're in rehearsals and then in the show, or you're shooting whatever you're shooting across the dates that you give me, and I know that I got to work around that. And crucially, if you're doing a play with your mates or a fringe show or a profit share, what we do a lot of is making sure that once you're in that show that we get to see it ourselves and we get other people to see it. Even though we're not taking any commission off it because we didn't book it, it's important for us because it's part of the way you promote yourself as a young actor. So yeah, you should definitely be having those conversations with your agent. And with the only, I think, pretty much the only circumstances with an agent would say, would you not do that, is that because I think I've got something better for you, but we're going to have to wait for a day or two to see whether that happens or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But by and large, yeah, I would hope, and certainly my clients do that all the time. And some of my clients, have their own theater companies. So they'll always drop me a line, or one of the guys in the office line, saying, this is what we're doing. I'm actually producing this, so I'm going to be out of the loop for this long while I work producing it, or I'm in it. And, and that's fine. We'd always support that. And as I was saying earlier on, because of that removal of a lot of the independent theatre sector that happened after 2008, it's really important that you go after that work, because it's not just about exposure. It's not always just a tactical game, this thing, it's creatively important for you to do work that you like and that's enriching for you as an actor. And obviously the more you do it, the chances are the better you'll get at it. So, it also, just to digress slightly, you know, when you come out of a course and you've worked in quite an intense way on a course, whether that's in TUD or it's in the Lear or the Gaudy School or any number of places you might train, you go through quite an intense process, and you come out of that process, you know, you pop out into the world, into possibly no job, right? Or to possibly whatever part-time job you're doing to pay the rent, and maybe getting some meetings, but you're not working in a regular way. And that's tough, because that structure and that routine and that discipline is not there for you. So you have to find other ways, I think, as a young actor to mimic that. And one of the ways of doing that is putting yourself through a rehearsal process, and doing a show is 100% part of that. But also taking a class, you know, if you can find a class that you can take, and it doesn't necessarily need to be voice. It could be that you're taking a movement class, you know, it could be some form of physical exercise that you're keen on. All of those things are useful for having you match fit to audition, right? So that you're in it, you're doing it, you're around it, and the audition pops up. And hopefully it's not the only thing that's happening for you that week. Because I think, as we all know now, as we're in isolation for the last 6 weeks, if you've got very little to do in the week, the one thing you have to do looms incredibly large for the whole week, takes over your whole head and melts your head in the process, right? So you have to be doing those other things that mean you go, I've got a class on Tuesday, I'm meeting the guys at the show we're trying to develop on Thursday, I've got a meeting on Wednesday. That's the way you want to be going into a meeting, right? Not, it's Monday, I've got a meeting on Wednesday, and the rest of the week nothing is happening, because all you're going to do is think about the meeting on Wednesday. And I'm always saying this, but it's very easy to overthink an audition, not to over-prepare. You can't over-prepare, but you can overthink. And one of the ways you avoid that is by, you know, trying as much as you can as a freelancer to structure your life with all these other things that you do that are about what you do. And so, yeah, but any agent worth the salt would be delighted to have that conversation with you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Con. All right, next person with their hand up was Ross Fitzpatrick. Ross, I'm going to cue you up.
Hey, Ross.
Everyone else has been saying it's been a great meeting, and another structure of the day that was I've been looking forward to, so thank you. I have kind of two questions. The first one is how you guys acquire clients. I understand you were saying it's a good time for us to look just before production and invite you, but in regards to your side of things, how regularly would you guys acquire clients? Is there a certain time in the year that's preferable to be sending I don't know, ideas towards you or emails towards you about possible representation, etc.?
Yeah, I think, well, in the main, I suppose it's true, because the schools all tend to graduate around the same time. So our busiest time for, you know, obviously for recruiting graduates is around that time. But outside of that, it's also true to say that if for some reason you don't find representation at the time that you graduate, that doesn't mean you're not going to find representation. And it doesn't mean, even if my company has passed on representing you on the basis of what you graduated with, that doesn't mean we mightn't come back in a year's time and say, do you want to talk again about representation? Because maybe we saw you in something in the intervening year and went, actually, he's got something I didn't see. I didn't see that before. Now I see something else in him, and maybe that's interesting. So yeah. Actually, you know, it's one of my favorite things about this job. People I do represent is going to see them in a show and seeing them doing something I didn't know they could do, right? And that's a great buzz from an agent going, oh, holy moly, look at that. And we definitely get that in the recruitment process as well, where we might see an actor in a graduation show or a showcase and go, well, he looks interesting, but I'm not sure that we can do anything for him, or maybe I'm not sure that we're enthusiastic enough about him or whatever. And then we might see him again in a show in 6 months' time or a year's time and go, oh, well, hold on a minute. And if at that stage you either don't have representation or you write to us and say, I'm looking for representation, you know, that's fine. We've definitely taken on people in those circumstances. Even in the last couple of years, we've taken on people who were a good year out of one of the major schools because we've seen them in something else and they've alerted us to us maybe, and we've gone, oh, okay, we'll check them out. Yeah. Maybe I've got a client in it already, which is good luck because I'm going to see anyway. And then that can, so while there is a window of busy activity, which is when everybody graduates, that doesn't mean that's your only shot. It does mean that's a shot you should definitely focus on, because you've got a number of opportunities there, hopefully of agents seeing your work. But it doesn't mean that's it. You know, if you don't get representation out of that process, that doesn't mean you're not going to get it. The business is of course.
Thank you. That was very insightful. My second question is kind of around graduate showcases now, just because of where we find ourselves at the moment. I've seen a lot of places adapting onto online showcases and different things. People I know in the Lear were saying they're teed up to start online showcases soon. And so would you say that the online showcases, do you think they hold as much weight as a regular industry showcase in an agent's eyes because of where we find ourselves at the moment? Or do you think it would be a online showcase and then see someone at something else?
I think in most cases you're right that it's going to be maybe, but this is often true, say, of the showcase that I might see live, right? But it's often maybe I see the online showcase and go, well, she's interesting, maybe I should see her at something else, right? So it's probably going to be a combination of those two things. But like I say, that would often be the case, even if you're doing the showcase live, that I might go, well, he was good in that, and I'll keep an eye on him, but I'm not going to offer him rep right away.
Of course.
And so I wouldn't despair in that sense. I do think, particularly for theatre, the online stuff is great and heartwarming to see so much activity in that area. But I'll be honest with you, it's a live experience, right? That's part of the magic of theatre, and it's tough to reproduce that on screen. Even, I've watched a couple of the NT Live things over the years, the National Theatre Live, and they're amazingly beautifully shot. They're very highly produced. It's not the same as being at the National Theatre watching them. How could it be? And so, that's the problem. I think it's a good idea to work hard on them and produce a good online showcase, because the chances are you'll catch somebody's eye if you make a good effort of that, and then they may need to see you again. But like I say, that may well have been the case if I'd seen you in the flesh anyway. I may have gone, well.
Of course, yeah. You don't want to go off just one showcase of something. You want to see maybe versatility, diversity.
Yeah, absolutely, if possible. Sometimes it's not possible, and you have to, as an agent, you have to fish or cut bait. But if possible, and I think in this situation, because we're a little bit slowed down, we're in this kind of soupy slowed down world a little bit, that it's okay for us to see you online, and then get a chance to see you live maybe a little later than we might have in normal circumstances.
Okay. Thank you very much, Johnathan. That was great.
Thanks, Ross. All right. The next person with their hand up was Alana Merriman. Alana, you want to stick your camera on?
Just give me 1 second. Oh, it's fine. So my question is kind of like a follow-up on Ross's question. It was just more so, do you have any advice or information that could assist us moving forward during this pandemic, I suppose, during this time of crisis where we can't necessarily invite people to see our showcases because we don't know if they're going ahead or not, or like what are, I suppose, Lisa Richards' agency doing to keep ticking over during this time? Because I find that we don't have that much insight into that, I suppose. It's like no one really knows, like there's no definitive answer, but is there anything that you could inform us to help us with during that process, during this time?
I mean, you're right. It's like I've got 20 years of experience in the business and precisely 6 weeks experience of this particular situation. So I'm not 100%. And we are, like every other business in Ireland and across the world, we are treading water right now. There's a little trickle of business in and out of our door that can be done. We have some voiceover artists working obviously from home and things like that, but really the business is, like so many other businesses, at a kind of a standstill. There's a small amount of casting going on for things that are happening later in the year, but that hasn't really cranked up properly yet. So I think for the graduate actor, I guess the difference is perhaps now you have a little bit more time than you would have had in more normal circumstances to get your materials the way you want them, right? So that means, now that can be a curse as well, right? Like having too much time to agonize over, the tabulation of your CV or which photograph you're going to choose or whatever can be a killer. But I think, do use that time to make sure that those things that will show up in somebody like my email are as good as you want them to be. You could look, I think voiceover is one of the first bits of our business that's going to come back So think about that. It's relatively easy to make a VO demo now. Whether you make them professionally and pay for it would be hard to do, but I think it is possible to do stuff in most cases using a decent phone. If you can find a microphone to plug into the phone, better yet. And think about, have a listen to some, again, there's good voiceover sites that you can visit and see what they use for demo, right? So a lot of what you'll hear, if you listen to a VO demo on a website, it'll be an existing commercial with music behind it, whatever. Now, you're not going to be able to do all that, but you can use the script. And actually, you'll find a lot of the time the VO demo that you're listening to, that person didn't voice that commercial at all. They're just using the script. And when you put the jingle behind it and whatever, not because the advertisers. So that's probably something you could do, usefully have a look at as to have that ready to go. Oh, by the way, I've done this for VO. And outside of that, I think that, the stuff that you could have done as an actor before this happened still applies to some degree. Yeah. So if you can find stuff online that's to do with your training, go find it. If you can find ways to keep your muscles flexed as an actor, try and use those. And whether that's kind of just a Zoom chat with some mates where you're maybe kicking around some ideas about stuff you want to do and we can all do stuff again, or whether that's physical exercise that is, or dance or song or any of those, so that what you can really hope to do is produce the best packaged version of Alana going out into the world as you can, and you have a bit more time maybe to do that now than you would have when you were running around trying to get meetings, trying to work 2 jobs to pay the rent or whatever else. But outside of that, yeah, I don't know, because I haven't done this before either.
Absolutely. So I suppose a leading question just from that really briefly is that, would you advise still against homemade videos for your show reel, or would you say to use that tool as an advantage while we have the time to get them to where we want them to be? Or would you still advise leaving it up for more professional situations?
I think if you'd asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have said, don't do stuff yourself at home because it never looks great. Mm-hmm. But it's much easier to get stuff to look a lot better now than it used to be. So, right. So a halfway decent SLR and a neutral background, you can actually shoot something that looks okay. Mm-hmm. So I would say, here's one thing I would definitely say is find scenes that you like, whether you can find screenplays online or you can find pieces of theater that you've always loved, and work on them on screen, because even if you don't end up using any of that, you'll see and feel what you look like on screen, and you can go back and do it again, try different ways, take the stink off it, because that's the thing about the camera for Irish actors, is they get the fear with, when it comes in many cases to camera work, right? Because it's not what we do, or it's not how we trained in most cases, and it feels alien. So the more you do it, the less of an intimidating thing for you to do that will be. So even if you shoot a whole bunch of video of you doing monologues or doing bits of scenes that you actually never end up using, it'll still be worth it.
Okay, yeah.
You'll be able to go back and look at it. But you might get something out of it that you could show to an agent to go, well, this is because I have, hand on heart, in recent years, I've had a couple of clients who've shown me stuff that they were actually self-taping for a role for that, maybe something they got or maybe something they didn't get. And it's been good enough that I thought, well, we should meet and talk anyway. So, that can work. Top tip with either monologues for screen or monologues in general, but certainly monologues for screen, try not to find iconic monologues and do those, right? Because you're just going to end up comparing yourself to Maggie Gyllenhaal or whoever else did it. Do you know what I mean? So that's not a good idea. You don't want to be chasing that performance. Even though you'll have your own angle on it, you're not going to imitate it. It's still going to be, people go, oh, I remember when she did that, she was great. So you want to find something a little left of center from that, right? So in other words, something that's maybe a little bit more obscure or less obvious in terms of the monologue that you might do or the scene that you might do, so that they may or may not have seen it before, but it's not something they've seen 1,000 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the free advice.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Alana. All right, the next person with their hand up is Molly New. Molly, if you want to stick on.
Hi, Johnathan.
Hi, Molly. Good,
Thanks so much for coming on to talk to us today.
You're welcome.
So I suppose what I want to ask you, can a client professionally approach their agent if they have concerns maybe around their contract, around their pay, their well-being on set, technical things like that, can they approach their agent about that, or would that be something you'd?
Oh no, absolutely, 100%. It's a big part of what we do. So what you would hope is that you'd hope that your agent will have got you, signed up to a contract which is fair, and that it's workable, and you're not being asked to work insane hours or do things you're not comfortable with. But if you find yourself in that situation on something that your agent has booked you on, that's the first person you call. Call your agent.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm waiting for it to happen to me. It's only a matter of time. So yeah, you should. And I always say to my clients, and sometimes, clients think, oh, well, maybe I can sort it out with the director, or I can what I mean? I don't want to make trouble, but my job is not to make trouble. My job is to solve problems. So if you ring me and say, I've got a problem with this aspect of my contract or the job that I'm working on, I'm not going to, ring the producer and give them the hairdryer, from my end. I'm going to ring them and try and sort it out in a way that means that you can get on with your job. Because a big part of what any agent does, or should do, but we all do, I think, is that we create a kind of a space between the work that you're trying to do and the work that the director is trying to do with you and all of the other stuff, right? And what we're trying to do, in other words, is create a space where you don't have to worry about all that stuff. You can just get on with being an actor.
Okay.
And if we've done our job well in the negotiation process before we signed you to the contract, hopefully that's the case. But do issues arise as you go along? Of course they do. It could be a class, it could be something as simple as a clash of personalities. It could be working conditions. It could be the shoot schedule. It could be a whole bunch of things. It could be terrible touring conditions with the play. And that's the point where you pick up your agent. And it's not, I think no reasonable producer ever sees that as being difficult or, hard work. If you've picked up the phone to your agent and go, there's literally water running down the wall of my B&B, please help, then that's a completely normal conversation for me to ring the producer and go, okay, we've got a problem with the accommodation. We're going to have to sort something out. And we'll sort it out. That's so that, in other words, it's important that the process of the show that you're trying to produce, or the film or TV show that you're trying to produce, isn't kind of got in the way of by practical, problems. Those that's what I'm for. I'm a middle person, literally, and we do a lot of what we do is managing actors in the job. It's not just about promoting them in the job; it's also managing them in the job, making sure that they're happy. I mean, it's not like, I know that the classic kind of crazy, Hollywood cliche of trying to find somebody just the green M&Ms or whatever. It's generally not that. It's not that that's never happened, but it's generally not that. It's generally much more, there is no heat in my accommodation, or, I've got nowhere to prepare for these scenes, or what have you, or my check is late, or whatever that might be. And that's 100%. So you should, and it's a good question in so much as you should feel, Molly, that when you're talking to an agent, if you're meeting an agent, that he or she is somebody that you feel you can pick the phone up to or drop an email to, because you should have that sort of relationship. That's really important.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much, Molly. Just to check in, Johnathan, because I'm aware that we've had you talking for a long time. Are you okay for a few more questions?
Here we go.
Are you okay for a few more questions?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, I'm fine. Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marvelous. All right. Next up on our students, we've got Julian Weston from first year. Julian, if you want to stick your camera on and let yourself be known.
Hi, Julian. Oh, where do you go? Over there. Hello.
Thank you so much. I've literally written down pages and pages of notes for all of your advice. Like, it's just been
using evidence against me.
I was just wondering, this will seem like an odd question, but do you have like a quota, or do you find that agents ever have like a quota, like with say, are they obliged when they go to like college productions or school productions that they like have to cast someone, or is it like completely based on the people and how much you like them and how much potential you see in them?
Yeah, so there isn't a quota, and we're certainly not obliged to take people on, nor is there a limit. So, yeah, it's entirely variable from year to year. Now, what is true is that if you look at, say, our website, and you'll see there's quite a few actors on there, and you'll see there's some actors that you recognize who are very busy actors who, take a lot of looking after. that we have to make a decision every time we take somebody on. Do we have the room, right? Like, do we genuinely have the room for them, that we're going to give them a fair shake of management, that they're going to get the kind of representation that we want to be able to give to people. So, you know, one of the things I figured out a couple of years ago, by and large, if you look across the world at agents and the number of clients they have, no matter what size the company is, every agent is usually responsible for between 30 and 40 clients. It sort of maxes out at that, right? Because if you've got a good book, as I'm happy to say we have, you know, your top 10 or 15 clients are going to keep you super busy anyway. And then you've got to find the time to work with the other 15 to try and improve things for them, right? So that's, you know, that's the way it goes. So we have those conversations all the time when it comes to recruiting. We're always looking for new talent, because that's the way the business works, right? The 19-year-old that I took on 4 years ago is now in her mid-20s. She's not a 19-year-old anymore. These guys are trying to cast a 19-year-old. So I got to go find some 19-year-olds to represent. So that's, you know, that's the way it works. And that's how we grow the company over time, is that we grow those clients' businesses and our business grows. But yeah, it's worth, I suppose it is worth being aware when you look at an agency. You know, we're very open. All the European agencies are. The Americans never tell you who they represent. You can figure it out, but they don't want to tell you because you don't be their client. But you know, in our case, you can just look on the website and there's everybody smiling back at you. And so you could see, well, you know, they've got like 4 women my age already, right? Or 5 women my age already. So maybe it won't work. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but it's worth knowing, right? That you might look at another agency and go, well, there's maybe a space there for me. So maybe I should pitch to them, right? Because I would be the first to say, whether it's with my agency or in terms of the international relationships that we have, and we do share clients with other agencies a lot. So we share with the majors in the UK and we share with the majors in the US. And they're big companies, as I talked about at the beginning of this whole thing. The key is that there's some kind of a connection between you and the agent, that you feel like the agent's going to go and fight for you. So don't be afraid to sign with a small agent. I don't care if they're working out of a shed in their back garden. If they are passionate about you and are going to put the work in for you, then you've got to give that serious consideration, right? Because that's what you need. You need somebody who's going to go to bat for you, somebody you're comfortable picking the phone up to. You don't feel intimidated, and you don't feel like you can't ask them questions. You feel like they're really genuinely enthusiastic about you as an actor, and they're going to work hard for you. So don't just think, well, I should go with the big agencies because they're big agencies. It's more complicated than that. It's about finding somebody either in a big agency or in a small agency or in a medium-sized agency who's going to fight for you. And that's what you need. But yeah, so we don't operate any kind of a quota for any kind of category. But we do know when we've got more in one category, you know, than another. So we might say to ourselves, well, you know, we've also represented a very small number of kids, and quite successfully in some cases. But so like Amy Beth McNulty, who we took on when Amy Beth was 14, is now, and she's the lead in Anne with an E on Netflix. So, but Amy, when we took her on, was 14. Now she's 19. So now she's a young woman. So we don't have casting for Amy Beth the same way we had for her. With different casting for her now. Obviously, she's doing very well. But we have different casting, so now we have to go, and we did recruit a couple of other young women who are 14 and 15 because that space now exists. So that's useful to know. But other than that, some years we take on a bunch of people, some years we take on nobody, some years we take on a bunch of people from one place. You know, it varies.
Brilliant. That definitely answers my question. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Julian. All right, I can see we have one more student with his hand up and 2 non-current students with their hands up. I think we might cap the questions at that, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's good for me.
Perfect. All right, Adam Callan from second year, I'm going to call on you.
Oh.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you keeping?
Hey, Adam. How's it going?
Very well, and yourself?
Good, thanks.
Thank you very much. As everybody's been saying, it's a really, really informative webinar, so thank you very much for being here.
Thanks.
My question was, in a sort of agent-actor relationship over a long period of time, is there any conduct or actions that they might take like during their career or when they're working or when they're just in conversation with you when you're working with them, that makes you think, I don't like this person, I'm not comfortable working with them in any way, shape or form. Anything like that, if you could give advice to people how to not get fired.
Zero anecdotes I can tell you in that department, but yeah, look, it's a good question, Adam, in the sense that, you know, I think people sometimes are unsure where the line exists between them and their agents, right? Like, because it is, as I said earlier on, it's quite a unique relationship, you know, it's quite a personal relationship in some ways. I think the things that are most likely to cause a problem, you know, as you go through your career with your agent, are things like not just a lack of information coming their way. So if you're developing a project with people that you think is going to be great, and that you're kind of eyeballing a set of dates for or whatever, but you don't tell your agent until it's happening, which has definitely happened to me. You know, your agent might get cross about that because they're like, oh, I'm just working on 3 other things for you, you know, that I thought were about to happen, and now I've got, you know, now your dates are all screwed up. So yeah, that's frustrating. When it comes to relationships with other agencies, sometimes actors don't understand that if we're going to start to share a client with another agent, which we often do, as I just said, it's important that you involve your agent in that process, rather than just ring your agent and go, I've signed with this guy in London, I think he's great. And you have to go, oh, well, we fell out with each other like 3 years ago, and that's not going to work. So, you know, you've got to, you really can't give your agent too much information about that kind of stuff. You know, and it doesn't need to be a long phone call or whatever. It could be an email or what have you. But that to and fro, you want to be able to get some information out of your agents every once in a while, obviously, and you want to be able to give them as much as you can. And I suppose a related question is, people often ask, you know, how often should you get in touch with your agent, you know, once you've got the relationship established? And the key is, it's like, you know, it's like your agent is sort of a family member who you care about, but you're not trying to date them, right? So you don't call them relentlessly, because if all of my clients did was call me and ask me what's going on, all I would do is spend all day telling my clients what's going on, and the answer would be nothing, because all I'm doing is telling you what's going on. So you got to, you know, say to yourself, well, maybe I'll drop them an email, you know, and maybe in the case of a young actor starting out, it's fine to drop an email once in a while, you know, and sometimes you might be dropping an email saying, do you know, I heard my friend is read for this thing. I think most agents don't mind that so much. You know, they might say, well, I actually pitched you for it and they didn't bite. Or you might say, well, I haven't actually heard about that project, let me go find out about it. But yeah, you just don't want to swamp them with contact, because we kind of have to meter out our day a little bit, you know. But it's important at the same time. You should feel that you can, you know, that it's okay. But that's, yeah. So those would be the main things, I think. And never show up drunk unless I'm drunk.
Perfect.
Okay. The last thing was a joke. I could see Tanya's head in her hands from here.
What are you teaching my students, Shankey? Thank you so much, Adam.
That is absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tanya, as well again.
All right, I can see we have 2 people who are not current students, but who have been very patiently waiting with their hands up. So I'm going to call on Mark O'Reilly, who says he's a graduate. So before my time, because I'm new. So Mark, you want to stick on your video?
Hey, Mark.
Yes. Hello. This has been great and very funny. Nice to meet you, Tanya. Hello.
Hiya.
What I am wondering is, when, if ever, is it a good idea to not tape for something that you've been asked to tape for? Because what I mean there is, like, I got asked to tape for something that when I read it, I was like, I don't know what you saw in my CV that made you think he should try this. And then I was kind of, you know, weighing up, is it worse to send in a kind of a dodgy tape of something that I know I'm not great in? Yeah. Or is it worse to say, I'm not going to tape for this?
I think it's actually fine to say it's not for me. But, you know, a lot of the time when you're starting out with an agent, they're going to fire stuff at you just to see what is for you and what isn't for you, right? So it's okay to say, without it being an issue, like, it doesn't have to be a problem. You go, listen, thanks for that. I don't think I'm right for it. Or I don't think it's for me. It's not my kind of thing. And then don't tape for it. Because if you don't want to do it, you're just going to put in a tape, as you said yourself, that's going to be weak. And then all casting you're going to see is a weak tape. And it's no good, right? In the same way, sometimes actors say to me, well, I don't want to do this job, but I want to meet the director. So I'm going to go meet the director, but if he offers it to me, I'm not going to take the job. And I always say, don't do that. Because if you want to work with that director, the only thing that director is ever going to remember you for is that you were the guy that wasted his time with a meeting for a job you were never going to take.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, I wish I spoke to you 3 months ago. Because the tape is sent. But thank you very much.
Okay.
That is my question answered.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mark. All right, and last but not least, waiting patiently also, Lila Harper, if you want to stick on your camera and ask your question.
Hi, Tanya, Johnathan. Thanks so much for doing this. So I know that you represent a few actors of color, like an example being Leah Minto, and I was just wondering if there was a role that specifically called for a white actor, but you represented an actor of color who was otherwise perfect for it. Would you take the risk and argue their case anyway?
Well, I'm delighted to say yes, because I can actually think of a specific instance in which I did that. So there was a production of The Cripple of Inishmaan, which Michael Grandage directed in the West End a couple of years ago, which I'm very happy to say Sarah Green played Slippy Helen in. And when it came to casting, is it that one? No, sorry, it's Lieutenants of Inishmore, more recently, that Aidan Turner was in. And when it came to casting, there's two young IRA men in that show who are brothers, and they show up in the last act, and they're kind of good parts for young actors who are just starting out. They get to show off a little bit, but the whole show doesn't hang on you. And so I directly suggested to the casting director that I had two mixed race actors who would be perfect for those two brothers. And she said, oh, well, gosh, we hadn't thought of that. And then we had a conversation about, the fact that because when the play was written, there's very little diversity in a lot of Martin's stuff. And so it was like, well, this actually might be a legitimate way to get some people of color into the cast. And so that's what ended up happening. One of them was mine and the other one was somebody else's. But, the great thing is, I think I'm really encouraged actually, when I look at, say, British theatre and where Irish theatre is going and where British theatre has got to in relation to casting people of colour. Because I've been to a lot of shows in the UK over the last couple of years which are just cast race blind. They don't care, right? It's not important. You know what? It's not important. For theatre, it really isn't, because theatre is a giant game of let's pretend, right? We all know you're not that person. It doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. It shouldn't matter anyway, because this is a medium in which somebody can walk on stage and say, now I am invisible, and they're invisible for the rest of the show. So, who cares if that actor is black and that actor is white? Look, it's fine. We all know. It's all right. For film, it can be tougher because film works much more naturalistically and they try and build, say family lines and whatever. And that can be tougher then in terms of how you diversify your casting there. But you can see that if you're going to represent the modern world anywhere in the Western world, you need a variety of faces on that screen, because that, thank God, is how everywhere now looks, right? So it's getting better. I try and do as much as I can in that area. I have a small number. Leah obviously is one of them, and Darryl McCormack and Aaron Heffernan, mixed race actors who are doing great, and they're hugely talented actors in their own right. And there is a little bit of space now for those actors to get a chance to be seen for roles they mightn't have been seen for, 5 or 10 years ago. It's a continuing and a slow process, both in terms of gender and diversity, in the business. But I think certainly in Ireland and the UK, people have finally woken up to it and are, proactively addressing it. And I at least can put my hand up and say, well, I know of a couple of instances where I've said, well, why couldn't that be Leah? Or why couldn't that be Aaron or whoever? Was there any specific reason why you need that actor to be white? And sometimes they, the casting come back and go, you're right. Of course, there's no reason for them to be white. They could be anybody. So please let's see them. So, I think that's got better than it was. And I think certainly if the British experience is anything to go by, the place where it opens out first is theatre, and then it starts to open out in other ways in film and TV. But, and we are, in terms of ethnic diversity, probably about a half a generation behind the UK in terms of where we are, right? Like the Ireland I grew up in was monolithically white. I was exotic because I'm a Protestant, for God's sake. Right? So that was like, whoa, so, and I can't express to you how happy I am about how that's changed, but our business is still catching up to it. But it is catching up to it, and I see it more and more in terms of the television that's been made here. in terms of people trying to represent the people who are Irish people out there in the world who don't all look the same. And that's happening. So yeah, it's a process. We're still going through it. But I do feel like I get a sense of progress. And we have definitely, as an agency, woken up to being a bit more proactive about trying to, encourage some diversity in our own book. And that's a classic example of how sometimes the business follows, it follows, doesn't always lead. I think I'm not going to pretend I'm a leader in that, but we have tried to catch up, and we're reasonably proactive in that area. But yeah, it's like I say, I think as a young actor who's in any way mixed race or from a particular ethnicity, I think theatre is a much more open door for you now than it was 5 years ago. I think film and television is opening and is getting better. I'm happy to say, because as I say, the advice I always give to anybody, if you want to know just how monolithically white we were as a country, go back and find a photograph of the Pope's visit to Ireland in the 1970s, right? There's aerial shots of the Phoenix Park. There's 1 million people in that park, and they're not only all white, they all have the same haircut. Like, it's amazing. So yeah, we've changed, but we're still learning. Like, we have a lot to learn.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was an excellent question to finish on. Thank you so much, Layla. All right, that brings us to the end of a very rich and fruitful 2 hours. Johnathan, thank you so much. You've answered our questions with such care and thought and detail. It's been amazing. As I mentioned at the start of this is a series of webinars. Next week, we'll be having the amazing Katrina McLaughlin, who will be doing a masterclass on working with directors. So we hope we'll see some of you for that. To thank Johnathan for his time and his care with this. We did this up with our last webinar. What I would suggest is if everyone would be willing to turn on their cameras, and we'll do perhaps the Irish Sign Language applause for Johnathan, just to say thank you so much.
That's amazing.
For your time.
Thank you. It's like the weirdest version of the Brady Bunch I've ever seen, but that was
thank you so much. All right, and thank you to everyone for their questions.
Thank you so much.
All right, and that is us. Thank you so much. I hope to see many of you again next week. Johnathan, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
And everyone stay safe, stay well, and wash your hands. Bye, folks.
Cheers. Bye. Thanks, guys.